And I suppose the first thing we ought to do is to read a small portion of it. That's scriptural anyway. That's how Ezra says you're supposed to do it. The Song of Songs, which is Solomon's, let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For thy love is better than wine, because of the savor of thy good ointments. Thy name is like ointment poured forth. Therefore do the virgins love thee. Draw me after thee. We will run. The king hath brought me into his chambers. We will be glad and rejoice in thee. We will remember thy love more than wine. The upright love thee. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. Look not upon me because I am black, because the sun has looked upon me. My mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keeper of the vineyards, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. Now, there's a lot of different thoughts about this this series of songs. Some feel that it's a running story, a narrative in song. Some feel like that it's a song with refrains. That is, it presents a subject and then it sings the refrain of that subject again, without necessarily progressing from a chronological standpoint. And some feel that there are almost no relationship between the various songs that are sung here. Some of the early Jewish scholars felt that it was an allegory which spoke of the love of Jehovah for Israel. In the Christian world, particularly those who have loved the Word of God and who have deeply appreciated this little book, the interpretation has come forth that it's a love story with a true foundation, but picturing the love of the Lord Jesus Christ for the church and the response on the part of the church for that love. The story, if we just look at it from the drama itself, is the story of a little country girl whose family evidently had the charge of keeping one of the king's vineyards, which was at some distance, a considerable distance, from the capital city of Jerusalem. The king had lands throughout, and this evidently was one of his lands. And at the time we come upon the scene, evidently the father has died, and there are two brothers and the mother and the girl, and the sons are older, and they rule the family situation, and they get all the work they can out of the girl. She's given charge of not only watching over the sheep, but she's also in charge of tending the vineyard, and she evidently is required to work rather hard. And the brothers are disdainful of her. Evidently she developed as a mature woman rather late in life, and they ridicule the fact that she wasn't very shapely, for instance. We'll see as we go along. And the thought was they convinced her pretty well that she'd have a hard time finding a husband, so she better work, better find out how to work. And they were not too kind to her, and they ridiculed her. Well, as the story progresses, while she's doing her work, along comes a shepherd who is somewhat of a stranger in the parts. And he pays some attention to her, and this first embarrasses her somewhat. And then she comes to the realization that he cares for her. And she just absolutely falls head over heels in love, just beyond any measure. She's just so in love, so she can't think straight, and she just completely swept up in her overwhelming love. And she's tormented some by fears that she couldn't possibly be worthy of this fine young man who she feels like is a real prize. And she seems to be ridiculed somewhat for even thinking that she might one day be won by him. And then, either before or about the time that he tells her that he has to go, and that he'll be gone for some time, but that he cares for her, and that he's going to come back, and that he's going to marry her. And either at that time or later, she finds out that this shepherd is the king. And this, of course, utterly amazes her. And she can hardly believe that that the king would have to do with her. And yet she believes he's going to come back. Now we have a little bit of a parting of the ways as far as the narrative is concerned. Some believe that the narrative goes along and the king comes back and takes her unto himself, and that part of the scenes are in the royal abode, and that even after the marriage, he brings her back in the last part of the book to her old home, and she's able to show the unbelievers and so forth, and she comes back as the queen. Now that's one thought. The other thought is that all of that part is anticipatory. Is that how you say it? In anticipation. That the whole scene for this young lady has to do with a particular time. And she is reflecting and anticipating. She's looking back to how she met this individual. And in this second way of looking at the story, would be over a very short period of time after she's already met him, and after he's already told her that she's coming back, and after she's found out that the one who has wooed her is the king. And the story part of it is reflecting on those scenes, the wooing and so forth, and her anticipation of what it's going to be like when the king comes for her. And the second interpretation would be that the story does not progress, and we're not told exactly how it all comes out. We're told how she anticipates that it's going to come. We're told about her dreams and her hopes and her thoughts concerning it, and that when the king is talking to her, it's what she anticipates the king will say. And when she's talking to the king, it's what she anticipates she would say to him, and how she anticipates her feelings will be, and so forth. Now, the reason this is somewhat important is because if we conclude, and I believe anybody who would study from a spiritual aspect, study the story at length, would have to conclude that it speaks of Christ, and it speaks of one who loves Christ. Now, the difference would be, you see, in one interpretation, we're carried along from the time we first meet the Lord as a shepherd, and then we learn more and more about him, and then until we learn enough about him to know, to believe with all our hearts that he's coming again, and we begin to understand his love for us, and we finally realize that we're going to be part of a royal family. And, of course, if we take the first interpretation of the basic story, that the chronology follows on through, then we're taken into the rapture and the millennial reign and the marriage of the Lamb and so forth. Now, I tend to believe, and I wouldn't be dogmatic, I tend to believe that the story itself is a short duration, and that the allegory has to do with the reflections of a spiritual Christian upon his growing love for the Lord and his growing awareness of the Lord's love for him, and his anticipation of the time when the Lord will come, and the anticipation of the future with the Lord. It fits better for me that way. I may not have made it clear, your two alternatives here. Of course, there are many alternatives in interpretation, but the two that I'm going to consider most likely is either that we have a narrative that starts at a point and just goes right on through chronologically, with only an occasional dream or an occasional anticipatory section, and that we actually have the time when the individual was a little girl and so forth, and when she was the bride of the king and actually in the royal household. That meaning the narrative follows all the way through. And it's all right. It just doesn't fit as well for me. It fits better for me to have the setting of very short duration, and it's a song of reflections and a song of anticipation. Now, the other point of disagreement under what we would call spiritual scholarship would be that one group sees the bride here, or the Shunammite, the girl, Shulamite, the girl, as representing the whole church, as the bride of Christ. The other thought would be that it's more intimate than that. It's more personal than that. And it's the relationship between each spiritual, apprehending child of God and his Lord. That is to say, it doesn't picture the relationship of the church as a whole with the Lord, but it anticipates every individual within the church who has this great heart-throbbing desire to know and love him to the fullest extent, and that it's individualized more than just to say it speaks of me as a member of the church. No, it speaks of me individually, and to each other such individual that is willing to appropriate it in that manner. Now, here again, in the second method is the way that it fits better for me. So, among all of the different ways that it could be interpreted, then what I'm saying is, I believe that most of the conversation is reflective and anticipatory, and that the picture is a picture of Christ and his love affair with each individual Christian that qualifies. That is to say, that really has that deep yearning desire to see the Lord face to face and to know him in a very intimate way. The Bible as a whole pictures this. That is to say, in some marvelous way, we're all the bride of Christ, but each one of us is his own particular treasure. It's as though in glory, Jesus Christ would be the very, very best friend of each one individually, and that each one individually would be his very, very dearest friend. Now, it's a little difficult for us to picture that. But now, if you could just picture the fact, if you have one particularly treasured friend in this human race, somebody that you just love better than anybody else. Now let's suppose every human being was just exactly like that in the relationship to you. Then that would mean everybody would be your very best friend. You wouldn't be able to differentiate, would you? They would all be your very best friend. But it would be, with each one, an individual thing. We're limited because we couldn't be with each one as often as we'd want to be if that were the situation. But the situation won't be the same in glory. And so we probably have some insight here in this story to just how intimate the relationship will be between Christ, and our capacity for loving him will depend, I'm sure, somewhat on how much we wanted to love him in this world. I'm sure that our capacity for appreciating his own individual personage there depends to a great extent on the depth of our earnestness and our desire to know him now, whether that has been fulfilled or not. It's a matter of a desire. And so, while these thoughts would be the thoughts of a young maid that's just absolutely captivated with her attachment to a young man that she thought was far, far beyond her reach, and with the ever-unfolding revelation to her that he's more than she ever expected him to be, and every time she finds out something different about him, it magnifies his love, her understanding of his love towards her, as well as his worthiness, until she can hardly contain in her being the longing to be his and to be near him and to be a part of him and for him to be a part of her. And this then is the picture of certain Christians that have that same intense, overwhelming desire to be approved by the lover of their soul, and to please him, and to be pleasing unto him. So it let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. I don't know if you ever studied the subject of kisses in the Bible, especially in the book of Luke. In the book of Luke, there are three well-known kisses. There's the penitent woman who was a harlot and kissed his feet because she wanted to acknowledge that she would have been lost forever in her sins if those feet hadn't been the beautiful feet upon the mountains that bring salvation. You know, Isaiah in Isaiah 52 said, beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him that brings good tidings. Speaking, of course, of Christ. And then when the Apostle Paul in the 10th chapter of Romans quotes that, he inserts them for him, bringing into realization the fact that when the beautiful feet walk upon the mountains, it's still the feet of Christ in one sense, because he's the one that's motivating the walk to bring the good tidings. But it's the feet of everyone who transports that gospel message that are literally stepping upon the earth. So it changes in Isaiah chapter 52 from how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him to Romans chapter 10, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of them. You ever notice that? But this woman in Luke chapter 7, the particular verse would be verse 45, she kissed his feet. You remember they were in the Pharisee's house, and the Pharisee looked with rather disdain upon the scene and said, my, he must not be anything to him if he knew who she was and what type of a person she was. He wouldn't let her do something like that. And then Christ rebuked the Pharisee. But here, this kiss is not the kiss upon the feet, which is the kiss of subjection. Neither is it the type of kiss that we have in Luke chapter 15, verse 20. That's when the prodigal son fell upon the neck of his father and kissed him. That was the kiss of a repentant son. And so you might say the kiss upon the feet is the kiss of someone who realized their lowly position and want to show their appreciation under the feet that brought salvation to them. And then we have the kiss upon the neck of the loving father who would accept back unto himself a prodigal son. And then, of course, in Luke 22:47, we have the kiss upon the cheek by the betrayer. No, this is not a kiss upon the feet, a kiss upon the neck, or a kiss upon the cheek. It's the kisses of his mouth. And that's in somewhat distinction. Now, there are a lot of other kisses in the Bible. And there's so many of those interesting studies. And I suppose it would take 2 or 3 hours just to do a cursory Bible study on the kisses. How about the section in the second Psalm where the kings are instructed to kiss the Son, make up with him. So, or how about the deceiving kiss? You remember the story of Joab, and was his name Amana? What was the captain of the host that Joab slew? The first one, he slew 2 of them, but the first one. This is in 2 Samuel chapter 20. Amasa, wasn't it? Yes, Amasa, I believe that was it. And remember, Joab took him by his beard and kissed him. took him by his beard in his right hand and kissed him, but he didn't notice that in his left hand he had a dagger, and old Joab smote him under his third rib. And that pretty well does you in. So there's all kind of kisses. But this is the tenderest of kisses. This is the kiss that just shows the absolute devotion one to another. Yes, I think in five of the epistles. I think 4 on the part of Paul and 1 on the part of Peter. It's a kiss with a holy kiss. So that would be a kiss too. A lot of kisses in the Bible. I suppose some of us just don't appreciate that kind of a subject as much as we ought to. But some of you ladies ought to really go for that Bible study. Well, ought to be a good one, you know. If you're teaching a senior high teenage Sunday school class, looks like you might get some attention 1 or 2 Sundays if you were finding the interest lagging a little. Maybe you could pick up some interest that way to say, all right, for the next 2 Sundays we're going to have a Bible study on kissing. What do you think that would do? Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. You see, if we take the story of this being in anticipation, all of this fits. For thy love is better than wine. Now, you notice it's let him and then thy love. But this, and here's something else we could say about this whole book. In most of your translations, they've attempted to divide the song into various stanzas or different songs. And in other translations, they've attempted to divide the conversation among the several characters involved. And some of the characters are a little difficult. For instance, just who are the daughters of Jerusalem? And just who is the watchman in the street? Even if we settle on the Shulamite and the shepherd and the king and the brothers, and we get all those down, we do have some very prominent characters in the drama that are a little hard to place. And there's not agreement at all on some of these passages whether or not the Shulamite is speaking or whether or not the daughters of Jerusalem are speaking. Now, some would think that where we say, let him kiss me, that's the lover speaking. That's the heroine speaking. But then, for thy love is better than wine, because of the sweet savor of thy good ointment. Thy name is like ointment poured forth, therefore do the virgins love thee. Well, you see, if we take the thought, if we take the interpretation that this is her thoughts, well, you can let all these words be the words of the bride. You don't have to say, well, they changed the form of address here from him, from the third person to the second person. Therefore, you got to change speakers. No. See, her thoughts could be, oh, I long for the time. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. And then she's going to think about, this is what I'm going to say to him. When he kisses me, I'm going to say to him, thy love is better than wine. I'm going to say to him, because of the savor of thy good ointment, thy name is like ointment poured forth. And I'm going to say to him, therefore the virgins love thee. When she says the virgins love thee, that doesn't mean that he has a lot of lovers. What it means is that she's going to tell him that he's the exact type of individual that every virgin would love to shed her love upon. What she's saying there is, look, I have the one that all of them would want to have. And isn't it a blessed affair when a bride can think in those terms? I have just the one that everybody would want to have if they could have their first choice, and I'm the one that has him. And this is the thought you have here. And this helps to bring out this individual approach to it. Now, I think these, in some of your Bibles, this third verse and even part of the second verse will be ascribed to the daughters of Jerusalem. But I think that it's all of these words so far. I think everything through verse 4, or everything down into verse 4 at least, is the Shulamite speaking. I think she's waiting for him to come back again, and she's thinking about what their meeting is going to be like. And she's saying, when he kisses me, this is what I'm going to say to him. And I'm going to say, draw me after you. That is, wherever you go, and we'll run together, or we'll go together wherever we go. We will make haste. I believe that all of that's the words of the Shulamite. And then she's going to say, the time's going to come when I'm going to realize the king has taken me into his chamber. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it. That poor little old me is going to be on the arm of the king, and I'm going to be in the king's chamber. And he's the one who's going to want to kiss me. And he's the one that will be drawing me after him. And I will be his, and he will be mine. I just can't believe it. And I can't wait. I just can't wait till that time. Now, I've already pointed out that she is you if you are the one who has a yearning down in your breast sometime that actually aches. From this standpoint, why can't I know him better? Why can't I please him more? Why can't my life be such that everything I say and everything I do would bring a smile to his face? Oh, that's what I want. And I long for the day when my depths of my desires can be reality in my relationship with him. The picture's beautiful. If that's the type of Christian you are. Of course, if you've never had that type of desires down in your innermost being, it's just going to be an interesting story anyway. It can't have any more depth than that. But for the one that knows what it feels like to have a little hurt, a little ache down in the pit of your inside because you're so disappointed with your performance in relationship to what you want your performance to be in his sight. And that's the type of an individual that can understand what this series of songs is all about. Now, in the latter part of verse 4, We will be glad and rejoice in thee. We will remember thy love more than wine. The upright love thee. Now, who can be speaking here? We're going to find some individuals come on the scene called daughters of Jerusalem. And there are various thoughts about who are these daughters. Some would say that it's every other dedicated Christian besides me, and that's more or less their relationship to me. Others would say, no, these are the angelic hosts that have been waiting all of these years for the consummation of the marriage of the Lamb and the bride. Some others would say, well, that couldn't be because angels aren't daughters. Angels are called sons. So it must be the others among God's people, like the nation of Israel. The others that have a relationship, but not the bride and groom relationship. And this seems to be the most acceptable approach. But I'm not real sure who the daughters of Jerusalem are. I just know that it's somebody who appreciates a beautiful love story and is rejoicing with the bride, here the Shulamite, without 1 ounce of jealousy, but just entering into her joy. That's who they are. Now, you may be able to pinpoint them better than that. But the daughters of Jerusalem are individuals in the king's court, you can say, or part of the king's eternal purposes, who are other than the bride, or at least other than you as a specific member of the bride. And the utterance there is, we will be glad and rejoice in thee. We will remember thy love more than wine. The upright love thee. Now, when she hears others extol his loveliness, and she looks upon herself, and this is one of the verses that helps us to realize, see, she's already said in verse 4, the king hath brought me into his chambers. But if you let this be her anticipation of that, and then you can understand why she says, but I'm black, but I'm comely. Now the ladies of the court, you see, it wasn't like in this day when it was some sort of a social advantage to have a Florida tan. In those days, if you had your skin was sunburned, it meant that you were a person of menial tasks. And if your skin was not sunburned, if it was very, very white and fair, it meant that you were of the privileged group. That you were, and the last thing that a member of the king's own court would want would be a sunburned face. And so she's looking at herself in comparison. And with the others around, she spent her whole life out in the open. And she says, I'm black, but comely. She says, as I look with these others, I can see that basically they don't have any more beauty than I do, but anybody can look and tell that I'm a pretty low-class creature compared to these belles around the castle, the palace. O ye daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. And she's just naming some other things that have, she's telling what her complexion is like. She says, look, you're so fair, and here's what my complexion looks like. Then she says in verse 6, look not upon me. She says, don't look at me, you'll embarrass me, because I'm so sunburned, I look black in comparison with you. And she says, the reason is, my mother's children were angry with me. They made me the keepers of the vineyard, but mine own vineyard have I not kept. She says, I was so busy doing what I was forced to do that there was no time permitted me even to put a little rose milk on my forehead, I suppose, or whatever. And he says, I just haven't been able to care for myself at all. And because the time was not afforded me. And so don't embarrass me by comparing me with you. Well, when we make the allegorical comparison, it would be the servant of God that's been out in the harvest field and maybe hasn't had as much time as somebody else to meditate and to fix up and so forth, because they've been out in the harvest field, out in the vineyard, out in the among the sheep. And so, but you see, with this lover, that's going to look beautiful. The complexion of the one who's been out in the vineyard is going to look a lot more beautiful than the one that just spent all their time looking pretty. And so he has a different concept of beauty. And in his eyes, this makes her extremely beautiful. It's just how we think that makes the difference. In verse 7, tell me, O thou whom my soul loves, where thou feedest. That is to say, where is it that you feed your sheep? If I wanted to be where you are, see, he's a shepherd, and he feeds his sheep. That's what it is here. So where are you, in other words, about your work? Where thou makest thy flock to rest at noon, for why should I be like one that turneth aside by the flocks? She says, look, I want to be where you are. Wherever you're feeding your sheep, that's where I want to be. I don't want to go to, I don't want to be found with some other shepherd feeding his sheep, whatever his angle is. I just want to be where you're doing your work. You see, this is the picture of a Christian. Every now and then has misapprehensions about whether or not they're doing enough for the Lord, or whether or not they're exactly where he wants them. So their heart goes out and says, Lord, where are you feeding your sheep? That's where I want to be. I don't want to be somewhere else. That's what the picture is in the allegory. Verse 8. If thou know not, and this is the words. And if we're taking the position that all of these are her words, and these are the words that she puts in the mouth of the one to whom she asked the question. You know, for a spiritual question, for a spiritual Christian, almost every question you ask, when you meditate upon the Word a little while, you answer the question yourself. The time should come in your Christian life when you open your mouth to make a request, and you stop in the middle of making the request and start giving thanks. Because you realize already the Lord has your life right in his hand, and he's guiding it. So why ask him to do something that he's already doing? Why not thank him for doing it? And you get into this position so that you can answer your own supplication. You know him so well, and you know what his answer would be to your supplication, till your lips give the answer. It's his answer, but your lips proclaim it. So, if thou know not, O thou fairest among women, go thy way in the footsteps of the flock, and feed thy kids beside the shepherd's tents. He says, if you need an answer to that, and if your desires are right, just go where you're led to go, and that'll be the right place. You won't have to ask the question. You'll just be there. In verse 9, the shepherd, the lover shepherd, in this portion from verse 9, he's going to look upon her cheeks and her neck and her eyes. It's sort of how he beheld her at their first meeting, and as she remembers it. And he says, I have compared thee, O my love, to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariots. One translation has it, the fairest mare of Pharaoh's chariots. In other words, here are Pharaoh's horses. They've been highly selected, and one stands out. That thought. Verse 10, thy cheeks are comely with rows of jewels, and thy neck with chains of gold. This would be her reflection on watching his eyes at their first meeting, when she saw his gaze of love upon her face, her countenance, and when he looked at her neck as though it had around it the most costly of jewels, it drew his attention to that point. She's reflecting upon that. And she's reflecting upon his thoughts. We will make thee borders of gold and studs of silver. Now, this is attributed to the daughters of Jerusalem. I'm not even sure exactly what it means, but it does mean this, that in the eyes of her lover, she's going to be bedecked and beautified with whatever opulence is available. Verse 12, while the king sits at his table, my spikenard sendeth forth the fragrance thereof. Now, if we let this be, again, anticipatory, her mind goes from the first meeting, you see, when she first realized he had a real love. What girl that's fallen in love doesn't fondly look back at the time when she gazed searchingly in his eyes and just wondered, what does that mean? Why is he looking at me that way? What is the cause, or what emotion is it within him that's being stirred as he looks at me? And she thinks back at wonderment at that first meeting, and carrying it in her thoughts, you see, all the way through to the time when she will actually be sitting at the king's table. And she will have whatever costly ointment might possibly enhance the situation. And she's thinking of that. Now, this verse 13 is not translated in all versions as it here is. Here again, it's anticipation. A bundle of myrrh is my well-beloved unto me. He shall lie all night betwixt my breasts. In the New American Standard, for instance, that's translated, my beloved is to me a pouch of myrrh, which lies all night between my breasts. What she's saying is, I don't know how long ago this has been, but there was a time when it was popular for a young lady that was going out to an affair would wear around her neck, under her garments, sort of a perfume pouch that would give off a fragrance the whole night, And possibly what she's thinking of is when she is in his arms and when she's his bride, how can I possibly make myself as pleasing, as fragrant, as appealing as it's possible for a young bride to be made? And that this is what she's looking forward to and thinking about in her mind in anticipation. And of course, the allegory would be, I know my lover, the lover of my soul, loves me. Look what he's done for me. What can I do? What can I do that would make him rejoice in my being near to him? How can I, in yielding myself and my bodies completely to him, how can I make myself fragrant to him so that he can have the utmost joy out of our relationship, one with the other? Verse 14, my beloved is unto me as a cluster of campfires, some translations, henna flowers, in the vineyards of En-gedi. Now, it's fairly well agreed, anytime you see the phrase, my beloved, beloved is the man, and when you see my love, love is the bride. And so, here, my beloved is speaking of her thoughts towards her man. Now, in verse 15 would have to be the shepherd speaking, the groom speaking, at least in her thoughts. If she were in that position of having been brought into his arms, and in that position of having yielded herself completely to his love, doing whatever's in her power to give him pleasure, then she is saying in her thoughts, his reply is going to be, behold, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes. And you see, on the one hand, the one way of interpretation would be, these are his words at some past instance. She that he is saying this to her. The other interpretation would be that she looks forward, anticipates his reaction to her desires. And that, and you see, when we get to know our Lord well enough, he, through the Spirit of God, gives us the ability to speak his words. And our thoughts are his thoughts. And these would be his true reaction. But in the story, she's anticipating that. He's going to say, "Beloved, thou art fair, my love. Behold, thou art fair. Thou hast dove's eyes." Now you're going to see as we progress through here the features of her body and his body mentioned. And in this chapter, as we said, it's all on the upper part of her body, as she recalls how he beheld her cheeks, how he beheld her neck, how he beheld the form of her upper body, and how he beheld her eyes. And she realized he was being captivated in some way by her beauty, that he actually saw something there that was desirable to him. And her response then would be 16 and 17, "Behold, thou art fair, my beloved, yea, pleasant. Also our bed is green, the beams of our house are cedar, and the rafters of fir." You see, cedars grew in Lebanon, and only the wealthy had cedar. They had cedar because it's fragrant, and it's not susceptible to destruction by termites and one thing or another, you know. And she's saying, we live in the most, this is, of course, in expectancy. We live in the absolute most desirable environment that could possibly be imagined. She's taking their personal relationship and expanding it. And she said, it says, whatever could possibly be desired is what we're going to have. And probably verses 1 and 2 of chapter 2 are closely related to these same thoughts, and probably there shouldn't be a chapter division here. That she's just continuing on. She's describing her thoughts in anticipation of what it's going to be like at that time. And she says, "Surely I am the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valleys." We have songs, of course, where Christ is called the rose of Sharon and the lily of the valley, but I believe that it's much better to interpret this as her evaluation of her situation. She's talking about her surroundings, and she says, and Sharon was a pleasant place. You see, much of Israel was dry, but Sharon was always grassy and full of flowers. As the moisture came right out of the Mediterranean Sea, it wet the Sharon, and it was a beautiful place. And she says, "I'm like a beautiful flower in the midst of a beautiful place." And she's talking. She's not trying to brag about herself. She's exulting in the situation in which she finds herself. Just like when you find out your situation in glory, those who have been faithful to their to their Lord, to their lover. And it's the same reaction you're going to have. How could this be me in such a perfect situation? Everything's perfect. My surroundings are perfect, and I'm being treated like I was the most beautiful flower in all the valley. I just can't contain it. That's the type of thought she's having here. And then his response would be, as the lily among thorns, so is my love among the daughters. What he's saying is, you see all of these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful women, these beautiful virgins, all of these beautiful daughters of the royal household and of the important people of the court. Why, in comparison, it's just like they were all thorns and you were a lily. Well, that's just about as high a compliment, you see, as you could pay to the beauty of an individual. Let's suppose this. Let's suppose you were having the Miss America contest, and here are the 50 of the ones that are said to be the most beautiful from each state. There's 50 of them. And then here's our heroine in the midst, and her lover says, you know, I've looked at all 50, and in comparison, they're thorns and you're a lily. And this is the thought. She says that I'm like a rose of Sharon. In other words, I'm a beautiful flower in a beautiful place. And he says that won't do the job. No. You're so outstanding and lovely that it's as though everything around you were thorns and you're a lily in the midst. So what he's doing, he's upgrading her appraisal of the situation as his eyes behold it. Well, that's about all we can do tonight, I suppose. Does this strike a chord? No. Well, too bad we had to start in it when we're going to be interrupted so much, and going here and there and the other place. Now, how do you summarize that at the second time around and start out on the next? Why don't we tell everybody that if they weren't here tonight, they can't come the next time we teach? I don't know how to work it any other way. Or at least they have to listen to the tape before they can come. How's that? How did I get so much insight into how a woman thinks? I know one thing. I know enough about women to know I better not answer that question. What do you say, friend? No, that's the only possibility. That's not diplomatic. Let's pray. Father, we know that this book is part of your word. Our hearts tell us that because your Spirit has taught our hearts. And so we realize that we're not capable just now of getting everything you have here, but we do pray, God, that we would see in these words what you'd have for us. In Jesus' name, amen.